He weakened us in a way that we've never been weakened before, and he should be ashamed of himself.
His fight to remove Confederate monuments.
It became really, really clear that this was wrong and that it needed to be corrected.
Race in America.
Do you think the president is a racist?
And in the South, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, I mean, it's usually a duck.
And whether he will run for president in 2020.
So, Mitch, I want to ask you this. How seriously are you thinking about it? Mitch Landrieu,
Hey, David.
good to see you. We're here in your hometown of New Orleans in the Cafe Reconcile. Tell me why this is such a special place to you.
Well, when I grew up, there was a Jesuit priest named Father Harry Thompson, who was the president of Jesuit High School, who after finishing that run actually became the pastor of a downtown inner city church and started talking about ways to help kids and to connect people with money with people who needed money. And he wanted to start a place where kids could have a better future. And he said that, look, we've got to go to, you know, the toughest of the tough places and find the people who need help most. And the children and the young people that are working here are kids that have lived the toughest of the toughest lives in America that we know. Some of them have been shot. Some of them were parents of children that have been shot. Some of them are young men and women that have served time in jail that have come out, and now they're actually running this facility. So now, not too many years.
Go on from here.
And they go on from here. Generally, right now, every restaurant, hotel, every business that's looking for really great employees comes here because these kids that, in some instances, one of them had been shot 3 times, actually now is working really hard. He's got a stable job, he's raising a family, and he's doing great stuff. And so this is a really special place.
You know, I read your wonderful memoir that you put out this year, In the Shadow of Statues, a White Southerner Confronts History, and you write about your family, and it seems as if reconciliation, racial reconciliation, has been kind of the mission of the Landrieu family for 60 years. I mean, your dad went to the legislature, your dad, Moon Landrieu, went to the legislature at the height of the battle over civil rights and voted time and again against Jim Crow laws. He came to the city council, led the fight to get the Confederate flag out of the city council, became mayor, and desegregated the workforce. You grew up around this issue all your life.
Yeah, I can't remember a moment in my life where race was not a part of it. It wasn't all reconciliation. It was a lot of battles. My dad really, it was very interesting because he was 29 years old. He was married. He had 4 babies in him. My mother, who's a saint, had 9 children in 11 years. They're both still alive. They're both happy. They have 38 grandchildren now. But back in 1960, when things were, I mean, really intense, how he found the courage to vote against the segregation pact. He was only one of 2 legislators. So I asked him, I said, well, you know, what were you thinking about? He said, well, I was really fighting for my friends. He had befriended a young man on the first day of law school whose name was Norman Francis. Norman was better looking, faster, and smarter than everybody else. And I asked my father, he said, well, he informed me. He taught me about what it was like to walk in somebody else's shoes. And he said, I wasn't just fighting for Norman, I was fighting for my right to be with my friends. And we just kind of grew up in that ethos. And I can't remember, as I've written in the book, there have been a number of different examples throughout our life where, you know, white people have been really angry at us because they think...
Well, you experienced that as a kid.
No, I did. When I was 13 years old. Back then, it was white people in the council chamber really trying to get after the city of New Orleans because the city was becoming majority African American. It was way on its way to it. And there were, you know, rabid people, you know, in the streets yelling and screaming about integration. The story is that one afternoon at 8th period, Father Harry Thompson, the same priest that helped, you know, start this facility with the community, came to my classroom and he said, you know, I need to walk you across the street to the gym because there's been a death threat. So when I got over there, I was in the locker room and, you know, of course all my friends run in and say, there's some woman outside that says she wants to kill you. And of course there was this angry white woman who was just as angry as she could be, and she went to reach in her purse and one of my friends said, she has a gun. And of course they did what great friends would do. They scattered to the winds and left me standing there by myself. And she took out a card and threw it. I remember it. She threw it at me. And it had written on it, your father's an end lover, he ruined the city, you know, you should be ashamed of yourself. I wasn't an adult, but I was old enough and mature enough to kind of get what that was. So, I mean, even back then, it was part of all of our lives, but I wasn't unique. I mean, that happened to lots of people in the city and the South all the
But
time.
what was striking, you say back then, but when you made the decision to remove Confederate statues from places of honor here in New Orleans, you met with some of those very same
Yeah.
reactions. Your children met with
Yeah.
some of those very same
Yeah,
reactions
that was one of
40
the-
years later.
Yeah, that makes you understand that we're not really through the issue of race. You know, when President Obama got elected, the country went, oh, wow, we elected our first black president. Thank God we got finished with that. Now we're past it. And of course, that's not true. Every day in America, as we are witness to, African Americans continue to suffer discrimination. We continue to tear ourselves apart on the issue of race. And on the issue of race in America, which is, of course, the greatest fault line in American politics, I have just come to learn that you can't go over this, you can't go around it. You have to kind of go through it. You have to talk through it and work through it. And I made a political miscalculation. I had assumed that we were further along, that after the shootings in Charleston, when Governor Haley and the entire folks in South Carolina finally took down the flag, I said, you know, number one,
flag.
the Confederate flag. Number one, it's time to take the monuments down. But secondly, everybody's going to get it. And everybody didn't get it. And it was much too hard a fight to have in the year that we had it than we should have.
In fact, you got elected with overwhelming support and re-elected with overwhelming support of both white and black residents of the city. Your support among whites in New Orleans dropped by half.
The city was racially united when I came. When I got reelected, it was, for the most part, you know, the same. When I took those monuments down, though, it really, really, really touched people in a much deeper way. And I didn't lose all of my white support, but I lost half of it in a way that will never come back to me. And what was curious to me as a politician is I've been involved, as you know, for 30 years. I was a legislator for 16 years.
Yes,
Lieutenant
when
governor
I met
for
you, we
6.
both had hair.
Oh yes, that was a long time ago. And I have voted on some tough issues, and I have had people come up to me and say, you know, I didn't like the way you were voted on the abortion issue or on capital punishment or whatever, but I generally like you and think you're a good guy, and I'll vote for you again. On this thing, it was much deeper than any other action that I've taken where people said to me, I'll never, ever support you again, which I thought was really curious.
You actually wrote that today's public square is teeming with hatred we haven't seen since the 1960s. Why do you think that is?
I don't really know.
I mean, it's too glib, isn't it, to say it's all because of Donald Trump?
Yeah,
because he
it's not-
seized on
it's not-
something and
it's-
exploited it.
Listen, I'm not a fan of the president's, but it is not his cause. I mean, he didn't cause it. He's a symptom of it. He's a perfect fit for exacerbating it, and he knows that strategically division is working for him, even though it's working against the country. But there's a much deeper thing going on, and so the reason I don't want to concentrate for the moment on this issue just on President Trump, other than to acknowledge that he has been complicit and he has put the accelerator on it, is because it's a bigger issue for all of us, and it's not just him. But it is worth noting that the germ, the seed of all of this is racial hatred and a sense of white supremacy, which is why in the book I talk a lot about David Duke, and when David Duke was in the legislature with me,
White supremacist.
I sat with him.
neo-Nazi.
He was a neo-Nazi. He was the leader of the Ku Klux Klan. He actually got elected to the legislature in Louisiana in 1990, and then subsequent to that ran for governor and ran for the United States Senate. And in one or both of those elections, got 2 out of every 3 white votes. So I have said in the book that we're not seeing anything now on the national level that we haven't seen in Louisiana relating to that racial issue. But it's critically important. It is critical to talk about the cause of white supremacy, because we have seen examples in our history that when one group of people think they're superior to another, atrocities occur. And one of them is slavery, one of them is the Holocaust, one of them is apartheid. You can see examples of where we as human beings have allowed ourselves, because we didn't check our worst impulses, to get to a place that create very dark moments in history.
Well, you actually said the parallels between David Duke and President Trump as demagogues are breathtaking. His Make America Great Again slogan is the dog whistle of all time.
Yeah, so if you spend any time in the South and you go speak to most people, and particularly African Americans, and you say, I want to make America great again, they'll go, I want to make America great, they'll go, well, me too. But if you put the comma and again next to it, that is a dog whistle of epic proportions to people in the South who are saying, well, when were we great? Like, exactly what years were we great? What were we doing? And by the way, do you know what I might have been doing at that time? So, you know, taking people back to a time when they didn't have the right to vote, taking back to a time when people couldn't work, you know, to slavery, to Jim Crow laws, nobody wants to go back there. We all, I think, accept the fact that America is an exceptional country, primarily because the idea of America, one that's based on freedom, not race, not creed, not color, not sexual orientation, not nation of origin, but just the need to be free, to feel liberty, and to have justice. That is what makes America the greatest country in the world. And so when people in the South hear that, they go, that's a dog whistle. And the reason why I compared him to David Duke...
Do you think he's a racist? Do you think the president is a racist?
Well, let me answer that question this way. If I said yes, the headline would be, Mayor calls President something, President rejects it, and we never ever get to the issue. I would recommend that people judge other people based on their behavior. And when you see an individual who is speaking in a way or creating a policy that's based on race, creed, color, sexual orientation, check off the boxes, that is by definition racist behavior. And so I don't think there's any question that the president, since the moment he began running for office, when he said all Mexicans are rapists, or we're talking about Muslims being evil and terrorists, or the fact that this false equivalency in Charlottesville between white supremacists and the protesters, anybody that reads a book on racism would say that kind of, you know, looks pretty good. And in the South, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, I mean, it's usually a duck.
Well, I'll take that as a yes. I mean, you wound your way around there.
I think I explained myself well, that we ought to judge him. It's not about calling people names. It's about accurately and without judgment describing behavior.
You watched what's going on at the border. Do you think that's part of the dog whistling?
The answer to the question is yes. These are all different ways of exhibiting the same heart or the same mind, is that somehow these people are evil. This zero tolerance policy is premised on the simple notion that if you come into our country, whether you are trying to evidently flee persecution or not, by definition, remember, they use the word criminal. It's a misdemeanor offense. That would be akin to calling your mother a criminal for running a red light and getting pulled over. So when you continue to judge people based on those characteristics, it makes Americans afraid of them, because if you can make them afraid, then you can get rid of due process, you can get rid of constitutional requirements, you can get rid of all of those things and begin to oppress. That's not a good place for us to be as a country.
You you elected lieutenant governor of this state,
Twice.
A state that gave Donald Trump a 20-point victory, and where he's still very popular.
He's doing well here.
And you wouldn't call all those folks who voted for you and voted for him racist.
No, I would not.
But what is it that is provoking this support?
That's an excellent question. Not every person that voted for Donald Trump is a racist. There are some people, not everybody that was against taking the monuments down was a racist. They, in essence, are frustrated with the fact that Washington is broken. And you know what? They're right. Congress is completely incapable of solving any problem. This last election, to me, was not really about Donald Trump. It really wasn't about Hillary Clinton, although those were the two, you know, personages in whom people could vent their anger and their frustration. But when you look at Operation Wall Street, or you look at the Tea Party and that whole thing, it is fair to say that people in America are feeling alienated and forgotten and left out. And all of that frustration found itself and manifested itself in the election of President Trump.
Next on the Axe Files.
Collusion in motion is what we witnessed this week. You can't have a coach plan for the other team.
I worked for a guy who made a speech that catapulted him into the national conversation.
There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America.
You made a speech when you took these statues down that went viral.
These monuments celebrate a fictional sanitized Confederacy, ignoring the death, ignoring the enslavement, ignoring the terror that it actually stood for.
Why were people so hungry for the message of that speech?
Well, first of all, when I gave this speech, I gave this speech in New Orleans to a local audience. I was actually delivering a speech not only to the people of New Orleans, but to white working class people as an invitation to see things in a different way, to explain the facts that had never been explained to them, to talk about what the real story is, and inviting them to think about things differently in an effort to reconcile. And I was really shocked that anything that I said went viral, because as you know, 30 years of public service, you give a lot of speeches,
yeah,
and some of them you think are pretty good.
So Mitch, I want to ask you this, and I don't want you to go into politician evasive tactics here. People talk about you as a presidential candidate, and partly because of this message, and because there is this sense that we are deeply divided and it's not healthy for the country. How seriously are you thinking about it?
Well, a couple things. First of all, it would be disingenuous of me to tell you that I don't hear that. I mean, a lot of people call and ask and talk. But I've been doing this for 30 years now, so I listen to that with skeptical ears. I know, first of all, how hard it is to get elected, and secondly, how hard the job is, and how many people there are out there that would like to do the same thing. So when you're thinking about something like that, you really got to think about it hard. You got to be 100% in. And so I hear that, and I'm thinking about it. When you say seriously, I am not doing what other people are doing, which is to say I'm not running in it and then preparing to, or setting up all of these apparatuses. There are a lot of really good people that are thinking about that. The most important thing, though, David, and I'm not trying to skirt the issue, especially given the way the president handled himself on the world stage, where he humiliated the United States of America, and as I said before, took a knee to Putin. Collusion in motion is what we witnessed. That it's got to be clear, even to some of President Trump's most ardent supporters, those who supported him because of trade or the economy, that was a bridge too far. That you can't have a coach plan for the other team. We just witnessed something that no president in the history of the United States has ever done.
Why do you think that was? Do you think?
You know what? I'm not interested in figuring it out anymore. President Trump has us all spinning around in circles trying to figure out why he does what he does. What we need to be focused on is what his behavior is and what his decisions are, and ask themselves whether it makes America stronger or make America weaker. And I think that he weakened us in a way that we've never been weakened before, and he should be ashamed of himself for the way he handled it. More importantly, putting that issue aside, we need to start figuring out how to work around him as a country and how to contain him.
Hard to work around a president.
Well, but actually it's not impossible. And it is possible for the Speaker of the House to grow some courage and to start checking the president's power. And there are lots of different ways that we can do that. Some Republicans are going to have to hold their noses and vote for Democrats in the congressional race, because Congress, if it will not do its job, and it has not done its job, they're going to have to change them. And you know what? If those folks don't do their job, they're going to have to change them as well, because this isn't about party anymore. This is about country. And the Republican Party has always prided itself on being the party of faith, family, and country, although I think the Democratic Party is as well. But how do you really kind of maintain that sense of I'm a true patriot when you're allowing your leader to actually, give to Russia whatever it is that they think they need? Ronald Reagan's turning over in his grave. I can assure you of that.
So you think this was a watershed moment in the last?
Well, I mean, I have no idea. I mean, how many watershed moments can you have before people?
I understand that, but I have to tell you, this one feels different.
A lot of them have felt different to me. Everything we thought we knew about politics has not come to be. There is a silver lining, and is that the country is tougher and more resilient than we thought it is, and the American people are more circumspect. At some point in time, though, it becomes clear and obvious whether the president is working on behalf of the American people or against them, whether he's making us stronger or weaker, whether or not we're heading in the right direction or wrong direction. The more important question is why his base will stay with him no matter what. And you know what? Even if they will, it is incumbent upon those people that are not in his base, but like him for certain things, to finally say, listen, this doesn't work anymore. It doesn't matter how high the stock market is, or what the return to the shareholders is, or what the unemployment rate is. You cannot basically undermine the very essence of what the United States of America is, because that can't last for a long time.
Leave yourself out of it for now. What kind of candidate do you think needs to run in 2020 to be an effective counterpoint to Trump?
That's an excellent question, because the Democratic Party can always be counted on to shoot itself in the foot. If it was a constructive primary, then, as you know, the Democratic Party, much like the Republican Party at a family food fight, will have a number of different iterations. You have the progressive wing of the party really tilting to the left. Then you have basically the moderates. Then you have people that are kind of fall into both of those categories, that are inside and outside players. Just for me, you know, this notion of having a new, young Macron come along, that may happen. I'm more of a traditionalist. You know, I would like somebody with great experience. I would like somebody that could restore America's statue in the world in day one. I would like somebody that knows exactly what they're doing, because they've done that before, that can stabilize and just rebalance the country for 4 years.
Sounds like you're kind of describing Joe Biden.
I think I am. Honestly, I think that if I had to pick today, I would, and he could take over tomorrow, and you know, life would be a lot better for everybody. And plus, he understands working class folks in a way that most people don't. But for my liking, I think stability, I think certainty, I think a good world view, I think experience, all that stuff should matter more to the world at the moment than anything else.
You know, a number of mayors are consider
some really good ones.
But what you're describing doesn't seem to speak to the mayors. I mean, no one's ever been elected president as a mayor.
That's true.
And do you think mayors have the experience necessary to run the country?
Actually, but yes. But I want to stay clearly about this. If we were in a normal time, and we're not in a normal time, we're in an abnormal time, then my view might be different about who should ascend to the nomination of the Democratic Party. As it relates to mayors, though, I don't think there's another job in America that actually prepares you to be president better than being a mayor of a major American city, because
why is that?
Mayors are executing every day. That's what they do. They are, in fact, CEOs.
You're also more exposed. I mean,
Well,
you get immediate feedback from your constituents.
Well, let me tell you how that works, because I have gotten laced, you know, more times than I'd like to. But in the morning, if my wife says, "Oh, we don't have any break," and you run to the store and grab some milk, you know, by the time I get out of my car, get that milk, and get back to my car, I have been spoken to in ways that would make you blush if the day before you did something that the people didn't like. When I go to the cleaners, when I'm at the market, when I'm at a restaurant. What happened to Sarah Huckabee Sanders? That's happened to me before.
What'd you
because
think
you're
about
in
that?
it. I didn't like that. That made me really uncomfortable. Obviously, don't agree with Sarah Huckabee Sanders but she's doing a job. And there has to be some private space for individuals that are working on behalf of the public to live. I fully believe that people ought to have a right to protest in reasonable time, place, and manner. You can be as vociferous as you want, as passionate as you want, but at some point there has to be a line, because then it's impossible to work. Plus, I thought it was just plain rude, and I don't think that we're not going to beat them by being like them.
What's your reaction to the movement among some Democrats to abolish ICE?
That's a bad idea. I had, as you know, when I was mayor, a consent decree on our police department. We had to completely reform the way the police interacted so that they became a part of the community, engaged in community policing. But we never said we were going to get rid of the police department. We said that we were going to fix it. The border agents, all of them are operating at the direction of the President of the United States. Everything that they're doing is at his direction. That is where the problem is. So I would not abolish ICE. I would refocus their attention on making sure that they take care of people and not hurting people. I really can't think of a crueler thing that I've seen a politician do than separating mothers from their children. I think that really speaks poorly of the president. It doesn't reflect well on our country, and it was really wrong.
Next on the Axe Files.
One of the issues that I still don't have a handle on, don't understand, and won't accept is the number of deaths of young African American men on the streets of America.
What did you learn from your dad about politics and growing up in a home? He was in office from the time you were born. What did you learn about politics?
Well, first of all, I loved it. Not all of my brothers and sisters. I have 8 brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And I kind of took to it.
Your sister Mary was the eldest. She took to it. She was
very
a
bossy.
3-term senator from this state.
You know, both my mom and dad came from a focus of service. We're Catholic. We were born kind of into the ethos during the Civil Rights Movement. My mom and dad were always about helping other people. And that was true in politics. It was true in private life. And I can remember just really liking what my dad did and hanging out with him. So I used to like jump in the car on Saturdays when he was mayor. He'd go in the car and he'd drive around the city, which is what mayors do.
Yeah.
They drive around so they can look at the pothole or look at the light that's out.
Daily.
So you know.
Yes.
And he would come home. I don't even. You never told me this, but he would come to the office and say, "That power, that plant that's on Second and
First time
First
at
Street."
City Hall was when he got into the office because he'd drive to every day a different route to
correct.
see whether
Correct.
this abandoned building had been taken
Correct.
down, whether this light was fixed.
Yeah, and he'd trick you, and he'd say, "Well, who was supposed to fix it?" He'd say, "Oh, we talked about it. It's fixed. It's not fixed. I was out there today. Get your behind out there and fix it." But he would always tell me, you know, really, in the course of life, without being theoretical, be fair, you know, be just, treat other people well. And he would always tell me something that really got later in my life, just like bothered the hell out of me. And when I go to him, I'd say, "Well, what do you think I should do?" And he would say, "Play your politics in the future." Mm-hmm. He just reverberated in my mind. Play your politics in the future. Whatever happened, don't ignore it, but ask yourself, what's the smart thing to do? Not the "I'm going to get you back" thing. What's the wise thing to do, you know, for the right reason? And that always was helpful to me.
You wanted the job so much that you ran for it several times before you got it.
Yeah, 3 times.
What'd you learn?
It's awful to lose. It's just a miserable. There's nothing good about that. You know how people say, "Oh, you do learn from it," because you'd be an idiot not to learn from, you know, the stupid things you did that caused you to lose. But it's not fun. You would never choose to do that. But I lost twice. And I've always wanted to be, I mean, just in my DNA, I've always wanted to be mayor of the city of New Orleans.
You walked into a city that was in desperate shape in 2010, still reeling from Katrina, fiscal problems and so on. You did a lot of great work to deal with those issues. The one issue that you struggled with right to the end was violence. Talk about that, because you write very movingly in this book about the experience of having to go console fathers and mothers.
Well, first of all, serving was really the greatest honor of my life. It was a tough 8 years. We rebuilt a great American city. But one of the issues that I still don't have a handle on, don't understand, and won't accept is the number of deaths of young African American men on the streets of America that nobody seems, other than their parents and their family members, to want to spend a lot of time on. And I think it's a fixable problem. And so it's something that I really wanted to know and understand.
How is it a fixable problem? I mean, I come from Chicago. Tremendous issues there related
I'm
to...
walking by faith here, not by sight. So this isn't rocket science. This is human beings hurting other human beings, mostly with guns. I wanted to explore the notion that violence is a public health threat, that it transmits itself like a virus, that it's a behavioral pattern that develops over time, not just because of personal choices, but because of conditions that people live in. And so I just simply wanted to save kids' lives. Now, we got the murder rate down to its lowest it's been since 1970. However, that number is still stratospherically too high. And in cities in America, in Baltimore and Chicago, even in some neighborhoods in New York, who has miraculously reduced their murder rate dramatically, you have young men that are being killed at numbers that are just not acceptable. That's not smart for a country that wants to be a smart country.
And maybe what we should be doing is encouraging projects like Cafe Reconcile all over this country.
Correct.
And programs
Correct.
that are bubbling up from the communities.
Correct.
That have the potential to give hope and opportunity to
Correct.
kids who don't have it.
Well, let me give you just a couple of examples. It is true Well, let me start off with the hard stuff. It is not true that guns don't kill people. Guns do kill people, and people use guns to kill people. So that we need to speak the truth. But it's not just guns. Education is really important. Early childhood education. The environment is important. The lack of jobs is important. Housing is important. Workforce training is important.
This issue of the police and community relationship, excessive force on the part of police, this is the issue that caused NFL players to kneel. How do you resolve that really, really difficult question?
Well, first of all, it is a really difficult question. The first and the most important thing is safety and security. But again, as I said, one of the great issues is how do you balance safety with civil liberties. In the city of New Orleans, when I became mayor, as I said, the Federal Department of Justice was coming into the city because we had had way too many police-involved shootings, and we had to reestablish the relationship between the police and the community, because if the community doesn't trust the police, they won't call them. Mm-hmm. And then they settle their differences themselves, and that turns into chaos. So you have to go through this very aggressive process of retraining police officers to know when to use force and when not to. The use of force can never be the first thing. It always has to be the last thing. And police have to be part of the community. They have to be from it and of it and working to it. If you're not doing that, then you're not in a position to actually keep the community safe. Now, there are some people who think that police ought to carry around batons, they ought to beat people, they ought to shoot them whenever they want. That's just awful. And that's what the issue of profiling was about. Again, back to what you and I started off with, as when you asked me about President Trump. The same rules apply to him as apply to the young African-American kid on the street. You judge him by his behavior. You don't judge him by his race, his creed, his color, his party affiliation. And if he is engaged in bad behavior, you appropriately use the kind of power that the state gives you in a way that protects security and civil liberties. It is absolutely possible to get done. It's only people who want to take a shortcut, that are not really concerned about those essential American ideals, that want to put us in a position of weakness. And if you don't do it right, you're going to cause more harm. You're going to cause more crime, not less.
Coming up next on the Axe Files.
You couldn't get someone to lease you a crane.
Correct.
To remove these statues. I mean, the resistance
was intense.
So here on top of this big column stood for, what, a century or more, General Robert E. Lee. This is one of the great intersections in New Orleans. You drove past it every day for years and didn't think anything of it.
Never thought about it. Never occurred to me. I knew who Robert E. Lee was, but it never really got in my soul or my psyche about how damaging that was to some of my friends until.
And one of your friends was the one who raised it with you.
Right, was Wynton, who we grew up together.
Wynton Marsalis.
And now I find myself, 56 years old, I'm the mayor of a major American city, and the public spaces in cities are really important. They say a lot about who they are and what they love and or what they hate, etc. And Wynton said to me, you really need to take that statue down. And I said, well, why would I do that? He goes, well, have you ever thought about him from my perspective? And you've had situations in your life where people have just smacked you in the head and you
go... Well, it goes to what your father told you
right,
about
exactly.
Putting yourself in someone else's shoes.
Putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. So, right away, my brain, because I'm a politician, was like, man, come on, you're asking me for a really, really big thing. But I did tell him, let me think about it. And when you say you're going to think about it, and you really do, and I began to research who Robert E. Lee was, what his connection to New Orleans was, how his statue got up, why he was there.
He had virtually no connection other than that he was an icon of the Confederacy.
He had no connection, except he was an icon of the Confederacy. And of course, the more I began to research, I stumbled my way into the real history, and the real truth is that the cult of the lost cause was a movement that occurred well after the Civil War ended to basically put a foot down and controvert what really happened during the Civil War, and to try to perpetuate this notion that somehow the Civil War was the great cause that was lost and the country was worse for it. And I essentially said, wait a minute, these are the folks that fought to destroy the United States of America, not to unify it. And then finally, as a mayor of a major African-American city, and then I'm rebuilding, being able to go to the people to say, we're going to continue this charade that somehow this man is a person of reverence that did something great for the country, and it wasn't. So I called the question on it. And so it was a a recognition that the city of New Orleans is a continuous government, and that I, as the mayor at this point in time, was continuing the work, and we had to course correct, which is essentially what I did.
And you removed this and three other sort of icons of the cult of the lost cause around this city, but it wasn't easy.
No, it was hard. But once I started putting myself in the shoes of Wenton and other people, this was so clearly wrong and so clearly out of sync with the people of the United States knew about New Orleans, which is that we are a great multicultural mecca. There is no other city in America, even although there are cities that are a little bit more diverse than us, that have the kind of accumulation of this uniquely American notion that out of many we are one. Our food, our music, our entire ethos is that we're all in this together. And to have icons like this standing in places of reverence that actually were supportive of things that were antithetical to everything that New Orleans ever was and ever is, didn't make a lot of sense to me. So once I knew, it became pretty clear to me what had to be done.
And yet you couldn't find a contractor. You found a contractor, his car was firebombed just for taking on the assignment, and he backed out. You couldn't get someone to lease you a crane.
Correct.
To remove these statues. I mean, the resistance
was intense. Yeah. And so again, I got another education. What institutional racism really means. You know, when white people hear that, they think it's some amorphous thing, when actually it's a real thing. When people who have power, when they have the money, they have the equipment, they have the manpower, decide that you're not going to get something done, it doesn't matter how just your cause is, it gets that much harder. And African Americans have lived that their entire lives. And so in the speech, I write a couple of times and use a couple of different examples about put yourself in the shoes, in this instance, of a 12-year-old young African American girl who's coming down the street and looking at him. Can you look into the eyes of this young girl and convince her that Robert E. Lee is there to encourage her? Do you think that she feels inspired and hopeful by that story? Do these monuments help her see her future with limitless potential? For the 2 years that I really thought about this, I talked to a lot of people. I really did a lot of thinking, a lot of praying, a lot of research, and it became really, really clear that this was wrong and that it needed to be corrected. And I really got to a point where I couldn't explain to my grandchildren, who are yet to be born, you know, that I didn't do what was right in front of me. And we had to fight every step of the way, but I'm immensely proud of it. I'm more sure about it today than I was when I started, and I think it was the right thing to do.
You were out there, you were lieutenant governor at the time of Katrina. You were in the boats. What was going through your mind as you were pulling people out of the water and seeing bodies on the water?
It was surreal. You know, it was for a moment we had in this country a complete breakdown of all the government systems. It didn't exist anymore for a couple of days, and it was a dark time. There were some really hard things. I mean, there were citizens, our fellow citizens, who were dead on the side of the street. That's emotionally hard to see. But even in that darkest time, what was most encouraging to me is that people started lifting each other up. This is why I know the country's really got a future. I mean, we've seen it here in our darkest time, in our darkest hour. People who would normally walk across the street from each other because they were afraid ran in to lift each other up. And people weren't worried anymore about whether you were white, whether you were black, whether you were rich, whether you were poor. Everybody was helping everybody out. But it was an incredible experience, but it was a dark time.
There were, I mean, the whole community took a titanic hit, but the brunt of it was felt in the lower Ninth Ward, and the sense that the sense of isolation, even during the storm, in terms of getting relief to those areas, created a feeling that maybe this was a systemic issue, that the poor were just forgotten. And we saw it again in Puerto Rico.
Well, let me parse that a little bit differently. It is true that the storm itself, when it came in, didn't discriminate. And I mean, it hit everybody, everywhere, and everybody got hurt. General Honore, who everybody knows is one of our great heroes, said it the best: when it's hot, the poor.
The relief efforts.
He said, when it's hot, the poor are hotter, and when it's cold, the poor are colder. And it is true that we had to witness, when you saw all of those American citizens on the steps of the convention center and on the Superdome and left behind, he said, well, who left them behind? The immediate punch was at the mayor and the governor because, oh, they didn't get them out fast enough. The much harder question is, well, the country left them behind, that there are institutional failures that continue to exist in this country, income inequality, people not having jobs, people not being able to build generational wealth, so that they didn't have the ability to get themselves out of harm's way. And of course, you saw this replicated in Puerto Rico. You know, we talk about Puerto Rico in isolation, but you remember that year that Puerto Rico got hit by Maria, they had storms in Houston, and they had storms in Florida.
Yes.
And right now, Puerto Rico is the place that still doesn't have electricity,
Right.
where Puerto Rico continues to be forgotten. It's part of America. That's part of who we are, and the country has missed that.
And this area was really down on its luck after the storm, and there's all this activity, not just Cafe Reconcile, but other activity here.
We're actually in a neighborhood that used to be the most aggressive pipeline to prison. And now with job training, with Cafe Reconcile, with the Ache Cultural Center, this area is starting to come back. And you see this replicating itself across the city.
You know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking you're going to miss this job.
I do miss it. I miss the construction. I mean, I'm a mechanic in a way. I like solving problems. I like helping people. I don't miss the relentlessness of the responsibility, though. You know, being responsible.
You slept with
for
a phone
everything.
on you every day.
Every night I slept with a phone. There would be nights when I was woken up because there was a catastrophic event, and I don't miss the relentlessness of the responsibility. It was actually a relief and a joy. I loved my job. It was a great job, but eight years of it was enough for me.
Coming up next.
You played Che Guevara. You played Jesus.
It's all down.
Yeah.
It's all down.
Well, President is a big role, man. When you were young, you had a different kind of song and dance in mind than politics. You saw yourself on Broadway. You starred in musicals and have a great voice and so on. You still sing from time to time at various occasions. I aggravated my mother when I was a kid because I wanted to be everything. But I really wanted to be a professional actor. And I actually started taking singing lessons and dancing lessons and music lessons. And when I was 16, I actually became a professional actor, got my Actors Equity card, and was really on my way, and then chose to go to Catholic University of America, which had a great theater school. I have a degree in political science and have a degree in theater, a double major. And I did that before Ronald Reagan became president, so I wasn't following him along. And people say, oh, yeah, you know, you did that because politics is theater. Well, in many ways it is. You know, we're speaking words, we're creating images, we're telling stories. You're
and you're the
taking
producer
stage,
and
you're
you're
holding the
director.
stage.
But I liked it because I liked it in its essence. I mean, I actually love the work that great actors and great singers do, and I've enjoyed it my entire life. I haven't been able to do much of it because I got stuck.
Well, you're free now, right?
I am free. I'm looking for a
if there are
gig.
producers out there.
I am straight up looking for a gig if anybody's got one.
You played Che Guevara.
Did.
You played Jesus.
It's all down.
Yeah.
It's all down.
Well, President is a big role, man.
It.
Mitch Landrieu, it's good to be with you.
Thank you.
For more of my conversation with Mayor Landrieu, you can go to Apple, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast app and subscribe to The Axe Files.